A racist cop thought no one was watching when he kicked a homeless black man. But he didn't realize that a royal guard was silently observing the entire incident, and justice was about to be served in the most unexpected way. You won't believe how it ends. It was a quiet afternoon on an empty street. Jamal Thompson, a homeless black man, sat on the steps of a closed shop, trying to rest. His thin jacket wasn't enough to block the chill, but this quiet corner gave him a moment of peace. Life had been tough for Jamal, but despite everything, he carried himself with quiet strength. He wasn't asking for much, just a place to sit and stay out of the way. The peaceful moment didn't last long. The sound of heavy boots echoed down the street. Jamal looked up and saw a police officer walking toward him. The officer's face was hard, and his body language showed nothing but hostility. "Comfortable, huh?" Officer Walker's voice was sharp and mocking. Jamal stayed quiet, already guessing what was coming. Walker stepped closer, looking down at him. "What are you doing here? Think this is your spot?" Jamal sat up straight and replied calmly, "I'm not bothering anyone." Walker smirked and looked around. "Just sitting here is bothering me," he said. "You don't belong here. This isn't a shelter." Jamal felt anger building inside but stayed composed. "I'm not breaking any laws," he said firmly. Walker's smirk turned into a sneer. "I decide what's a problem around here. You're just dirt. Get out of here, or I'll make you." The air grew tense as Jamal refused to back down, holding on to the little pride he had left. But what neither of them realized was that someone else had been quietly watching the entire time, ready to step in when it mattered most. Officer Walker stood over Jamal, his expression filled with anger and disdain. "I told you, you don't belong here," Walker said, his voice rising. "You think you can just sit here and do nothing? People like you are the problem." Jamal stayed seated, his hands resting on his knees. He tried to stay calm, knowing things could escalate if he reacted. "I'm not causing any trouble," he said quietly, meeting Walker's glare. But his calm response only seemed to make the officer angrier. "You think you can talk back to me?" Walker sneered, stepping closer. "You're nothing but dirt. You don't matter." His words were filled with hate, each one meant to tear Jamal down. Jamal felt anger boiling inside him but kept his voice steady. "I haven't done anything wrong. I have every right to be here." Walker didn't like that answer. He leaned in closer, his tone mocking. "You think anyone cares about you? You're just another nobody. No one's going to believe you over me." As the tension grew, Walker suddenly pushed Jamal hard. Jamal stumbled backward, catching himself on the edge of the steps. The officer didn't stop there. He stepped closer, his face full of rage. "Maybe I need to teach you a lesson," he said coldly. Before Jamal could react, Walker raised his boot and kicked him in the side. The force of the kick knocked Jamal to his knees, pain shooting through his ribs. Jamal gasped for air, but even then, he refused to look away. He locked eyes with Walker, his face filled with both pain and defiance. Walker stood over him, smirking. "See? You don't matter. No one's going to care about this." He spat the words, expecting Jamal to break. But Jamal didn't. Slowly, he pushed himself back up, pain still throbbing in his side. He straightened his posture and looked Walker in the eyes. "You're wrong," he said firmly. "I do matter." For a moment, something flickered in Walker's face, uncertainty, perhaps, but it quickly turned back to anger. What Walker didn't know was that someone had been watching the entire time. Justice was closer than he thought. Unbeknownst to Officer Walker, someone had been watching everything from a short distance away. Standing silently, dressed in his striking uniform, was a member of the Royal Guard. His posture was strong, his expression calm, but his eyes told a different story. They were sharp, focused, and filled with a quiet sense of justice. The royal guard had been on a private walk, enjoying the quiet of the city streets. But when he heard the raised voices and saw the officer's aggression toward Jamal, he stopped. At first, he simply observed, wanting to understand the situation. However, as the insults turned into violence, he knew he could no longer stand by. When Walker kicked Jamal, the guard's face hardened. This wasn't just a case of abuse of power, it was a blatant disregard for human dignity. His duty, though far from this street, was built on values of honor and justice, and he felt those values being tested now. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. The sound of his polished boots against the pavement echoed as he approached. Both Jamal and Walker turned toward him, surprised by his sudden presence. Walker's face twisted in confusion, quickly replaced by unease as he recognized the authority the guard carried. The royal guard stood tall, his commanding presence instantly shifting the dynamic. His voice was calm but firm. "What's going on here?" he asked, his gaze locked on Walker. Walker stiffened, trying to regain his composure. "Just doing my job," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. The guard didn't back down. "I saw what you did," he said sharply. "Your job doesn't involve violence against unarmed citizens. You've crossed the line." Jamal looked up at the guard, his pain briefly forgotten as hope flickered in his eyes. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen, truly seen. Walker tried to argue, but the guard cut him off. "This behavior is unacceptable," he said firmly. "You will answer for this." The tension in the air was thick, but it was clear the power had shifted. Walker was no longer in control, and Jamal, though hurt, stood a little taller knowing someone had stepped in to stand by him. The royal guard's intervention had changed everything. The royal guard's presence alone was enough to shift the balance of power. His commanding voice and unshakable authority made it clear that this was no ordinary bystander. Officer Walker, who moments ago had been so confident in his actions, now seemed uneasy, his bravado quickly fading. The guard turned his attention to Jamal, who was still standing but visibly in pain. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice calm but filled with concern. Jamal nodded slightly, his hand resting on his ribs where Walker's kick had landed. The guard's jaw tightened at the sight, his sense of justice ignited even further. Walker tried to interrupt. "Look, this isn't what it seems." He was loitering, causing a disturbance. "I was just doing my job." The guard's sharp gaze cut through Walker's excuses. "Your job does not include violence against innocent people," he said firmly. "I witnessed everything. You targeted this man without cause, insulted him, and physically assaulted him. Your actions are not only unprofessional but a disgrace to the badge you wear." Walker opened his mouth to protest, but the guard held up a hand to silence him. "Enough," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You've already said more than enough." Pulling out his phone, the guard made a direct call to higher authorities, his words measured and precise as he reported the incident. He described in detail how Walker had approached Jamal unprovoked, escalated the situation with verbal abuse, and ultimately resorted to physical violence. The guard's unwavering professionalism ensured that nothing was left out, making it clear that this would not be swept under the rug. Within minutes, another squad car arrived, this one carrying a senior officer. Walker's demeanor shifted further as he saw the arrival of his superiors. The senior officer, a stern-looking woman with decades of experience, stepped out and approached the scene. The royal guard explained everything he had witnessed, leaving no doubt about Walker's misconduct. The senior officer turned to Walker, her expression unreadable but firm. "Officer Walker, you are relieved of duty pending an internal investigation. Hand over your badge and weapon." Walker's face flushed with humiliation as he removed his badge and handed it over. The bystanders who had gathered watched the scene unfold, some recording on their phones. For someone like Walker, who had thrived on unchecked power, the public humiliation was a stark reminder that no one is above accountability. Jamal, still standing nearby, felt a mix of emotions: relief, validation, and disbelief that someone had actually stood up for him. The royal guard turned to him, his expression softening. "You're free to go now," he said. "And I'll make sure this incident doesn't go unnoticed. You deserve justice." As Walker was escorted into the back of the squad car, the weight of his actions began to sink in. The videos circulating online only added to his disgrace, sparking outrage across social media and demands for greater accountability within the police force. For Jamal, the intervention of the Royal Guard wasn't just about that day, it was about much more. It was a reminder that there are still people willing to stand up against injustice, no matter how entrenched it seems. As he walked away from the scene, his head held high, he felt a renewed sense of hope. The world wasn't perfect, but moments like this showed that change was possible when the right people stood up. In the days following the incident, Jamal's life began to change in ways he never thought possible. The Royal Guard, true to his word, reached out through his connections to ensure Jamal received the support he needed. First, a lawyer was arranged to help Jamal take legal action against Officer Walker and the department. The lawyer, compassionate and skilled, assured Jamal that his case could lead to real change, not just for him, but for others who had suffered similar injustices. Alongside legal support, the Guard connected Jamal with a local organization that specialized in helping the homeless. They provided him with temporary shelter, warm meals, and a safe place to rest, a world of difference from the cold steps he had called home for so long. For the first time in years, Jamal felt like he wasn't invisible. People were not only seeing him but were also standing with him. As Jamal settled into his new environment, he began reflecting on the events that had brought him to this point. The pain and humiliation he endured at Walker's hands were still fresh in his mind, but they no longer defined him. Instead, he felt a growing sense of empowerment. The Royal Guard's intervention reminded him that his life mattered and that he had every right to stand up for himself and others like him. Jamal knew this was his chance to make a difference. The thought of simply moving on and leaving the incident behind felt wrong. He decided to use his voice to advocate for others who faced abuse, discrimination, or homelessness. Through the organization that had helped him, Jamal began volunteering, sharing his story with others who had been ignored and mistreated by society. His words carried weight, resonating deeply with those who had lost hope. Slowly but surely, he started becoming a symbol of resilience and courage in his community. Meanwhile, the Royal Guard became a symbol of accountability. News of his intervention spread quickly, sparking discussions about abuse of power and the importance of speaking out. Social media lit up with praise for the Guard's actions, with many calling for reforms in policing and greater protections for vulnerable populations. His calm yet firm stance against injustice inspired countless others, showing that even small acts of courage could create ripples of change. For Jamal, the Royal Guard's presence meant more than just a turning point in his life. It showed him that not everyone in a position of authority was indifferent or abusive. The Guard had used his power not to oppress, but to uplift and protect, something Jamal wanted to emulate in his own life. Months later, Jamal stood in front of a small crowd at a community center, speaking to others about his journey. "That day could have broken me," he said, his voice steady and filled with emotion. "But someone chose to stand up when it mattered. Now, I want to be that someone for others." The audience applauded, and Jamal spotted the Royal Guard standing in the back, a quiet smile on his face. Their eyes met briefly, a shared understanding passing between them. Jamal's journey wasn't over, but he now had a purpose, a path to redemption, not just for himself but for everyone he hoped to help along the way. This story reminds us of the power we have when we choose to stand together against injustice. No matter how small the act, standing up for what's right creates a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. What would you do if you witnessed abuse like this? How would you react? Share your thoughts in the comments below, we'd love to hear from you. And while you're here, let us know where you're watching this video from and what you're doing right now. Whether you're at home, on your commute, or just taking a break, your voice matters. If you believe in stories of justice and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. By joining us, you'll help spread these messages and stay updated on more stories that inspire hope and change. Together, we can build a community that stands strong against injustice.